Ridge Corbin was one river crossing from freedom, until they blew the bridge and turned a dead-end town into a coffin. 5 bounty hunters are closing in, but Ridge ain't planning on dying easy, and this trap might just turn into a tomb for them. Dust swirled around Ridge Corbin's boots as he urged his horse, a sturdy Appaloosa named Patches, across the wooden bridge leading into Coal Bend. The air itself felt heavy, like a storm was brewing, not just in the sky but in the very bones of the town. Ridge tugged his hat lower, shading his eyes. He'd ridden for days, and Coal Bend was meant to be a quick stop for supplies, nothing more. But something felt wrong, very wrong. He'd barely reached the main street, a scattering of weathered buildings clinging to the side of a dusty hill, when a deafening roar ripped through the afternoon calm. Ridge reined in Patches, the horse whinnying in fright, just in time to see the bridge he'd crossed moments before explode in a shower of splinters and smoke. The blast echoed through the valley, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. Ridge stared, disbelief warring with a growing sense of dread. The only way in was now the only way out, and it was gone, just like that. Trapped, he scanned the surrounding hills, his hand instinctively moving to the worn Colt Peacemaker at his hip. This wasn't an accident. Someone had wanted him here, wanted him cornered. Patches shifted nervously beneath him. Ridge patted the horse's neck, trying to calm them both. "Easy, boy," he murmured. "Easy." A flicker of movement on a rooftop caught his eye. A glint of metal. Ridge knew with a chilling certainty that his arrival hadn't gone unnoticed. Coal Bend wasn't just a dying mining town, it was a trap, and he, Ridge Corbin, had just ridden right into it. The game had begun. The glint of metal solidified Ridge's suspicions. He wasn't just unlucky, he was hunted. He urged Patches forward, keeping to the shadows of the buildings, his eyes constantly scanning the rooftops and windows. He needed to figure out who was after him and why Coal Bend was the chosen battleground. A wanted poster, flapping in the wind against the wall of the general store, provided a grim answer. Ridge recognized his own face staring back at him, though the drawing was a little generous. "Ridge Corbin," it proclaimed in bold letters. "Wanted, dead or alive, for crimes against the railroad." The reward offered was substantial enough to draw every lowlife and gunslinger for miles around. 5 figures emerged from the shadows at the far end of the street. They moved with a purpose, their faces grim, their hands resting on the butts of their revolvers. Bounty hunters, 5 of them. Ridge counted quickly. He had maybe 20 bullets left in his gun belt, a half-eaten biscuit in his saddlebag, and no allies in sight. The odds were stacked against him, higher than the mountain peaks surrounding Coal Bend. The lead bounty hunter, a burly man with a scar that bisected his left eye, raised his voice, the sound echoing in the sudden quiet. "Corbin, we know you're here. Come out peacefully, and maybe, just maybe, we'll make it quick." Ridge didn't reply. Peaceful wasn't in his vocabulary, not when his life was on the line. He dismounted Patches, giving the horse a gentle nudge towards the edge of town, away from the impending danger. "Get out of here, boy," he whispered. "Go on, find somewhere safe." Patches hesitated, then, with a mournful whinny, turned and galloped away, disappearing into the sparse scrubland beyond the town. Ridge was alone, but he wasn't defeated, not yet. Ridge knew he couldn't stay in the open. The bounty hunters would pick him off one by one. He needed cover, a place to think, a place to plan. His gaze fell upon the dilapidated saloon across the street. The Golden Nugget, its sign barely clinging to the rotting wood, looked deserted, forgotten, perfect. He dashed across the street, dodging between overturned barrels and piles of discarded mining equipment. The front door of the saloon creaked open with a mournful groan as he slipped inside. The air inside was thick with the smell of stale beer and dust, the silence broken only by the scurrying of unseen critters. The saloon was a single large room. A long, scarred bar stretched along one wall, its surface sticky with years of spilled drinks. Broken chairs were scattered around overturned tables, remnants of long-forgotten brawls. Sunlight filtered weakly through the grimy windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Ridge moved quickly, checking the back rooms. Empty. The kitchen was a disaster, pots and pans rusted and scattered, cobwebs hanging like ghostly decorations. He found a relatively clean corner behind the bar and crouched down, taking stock of his situation. 20 bullets, 1 half-eaten biscuit, a canteen that was half full of water, and 5 heavily armed bounty hunters waiting outside. Not exactly ideal. He pulled out his knife, a sturdy Bowie knife his father had given him, and sharpened it against the bar. Every little bit helped. He needed a plan, and he needed it fast. The scar-faced bounty hunter wouldn't wait forever. Ridge closed his eyes, trying to clear his head to focus. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped, but he wasn't outsmarted, not yet. The golden nugget might be a dusty, forgotten place, but it was his for now, and he was going to use it to his advantage. A crash from the front door shattered the silence. Ridge gripped his Colt, his heart pounding against his ribs. The bounty hunters were inside. The scar-faced leader stepped into the saloon, his eyes scanning the room, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Come on out, Corbin," he called. "No use hidden, we know you're here." Two other bounty hunters fanned out, flanking him, their guns drawn. The remaining two covered the back exits. Ridge was surrounded. He took a deep breath, steeling himself. He had one chance, and it had to be perfect. He reached for a bottle of whiskey on the shelf behind the bar, the glass slick with dust. "Last chance, Corbin," the leader shouted, taking a step forward. Ridge hurled the bottle. It smashed against the leader's head with a satisfying thud. The man staggered back, momentarily stunned. In that instant, Ridge burst from behind the bar, firing his Colt. The first shot hit one of the flanking bounty hunters in the shoulder. He cried out, dropping his gun. The second shot whizzed past the scar-faced leader's ear. Ridge didn't wait to see if it hit. He dove behind an overturned table, using it as cover while he reloaded. The saloon erupted in gunfire. Bullets ripped through the air, tearing holes in the walls and shattering bottles. Ridge returned fire, aiming carefully, conserving his precious ammunition. He managed to wound another bounty hunter, forcing him to retreat behind a pillar, but he was still outnumbered. He needed to escape to find another way out. He spotted a trapdoor in the floor near the back of the saloon, hidden beneath a pile of old carpets. A way to the cellars, perhaps, or maybe even the mines. He saw his opportunity. The scar-faced leader was distracted, yelling orders to his men. Ridge seized his chance, sprinting towards the back of the saloon, bullets flying around him. He ripped the carpets away from the trapdoor, yanked it open, and plunged into the darkness below. The trapdoor slammed shut above him, plunging Ridge into absolute darkness. He landed hard on a dirt floor, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and something else, something metallic. He felt around, his hands encountering rough-hewn wooden beams and cold stone. He was definitely underground. Above him, he could hear the muffled shouts of the bounty hunters. They were searching the saloon, cursing his escape. He didn't have much time. He needed to move to get as far away from the saloon as possible. He fumbled in his pocket for a match, striking it against the rough stone wall. The tiny flame illuminated a narrow tunnel, barely wide enough for him to squeeze through. The walls were supported by thick wooden timbers, and the air was heavy with dust. This was it, the entrance to the abandoned mine shafts. He extinguished the match, conserving his supply, and began to move forward, feeling his way along the tunnel wall. The darkness was disorienting, and the air was stifling. He could hear the drip, drip, drip of water echoing through the tunnels, a constant reminder of the claustrophobic space he was in. After what felt like an eternity, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber. He struck another match. The chamber was vast, its ceiling lost in the darkness above. He could see the remnants of old mining equipment, rusted carts, broken pickaxes, and piles of discarded rock. This was the main shaft. He extinguished the match again, his mind racing. He had to assume the bounty hunters would follow him into the mines. He needed to find a way to use the tunnels to his advantage, to turn their hunt into a deadly game of cat and mouse. He moved deeper into the darkness, his senses on high alert, listening for any sign of pursuit. The alleyways above might offer escape, but the mines offered a chance to fight back. He had to make the most of it. A brief interlude, a glimpse into the past. 10 years earlier. A younger Ridge, barely more than a boy, scrambled up a rocky hillside, his bare feet sure on the treacherous terrain. He was being chased, not by bounty hunters, but by the foreman of the railroad, a cruel man with a whip and a fiery temper. Ridge had been working on the railroad, laying track under the scorching sun, for months. The work was brutal, the pay meager. But he had a younger sister to support, and he'd do anything for her. One day, he'd witnessed the foreman cheating the workers out of their wages, pocketing the money himself. Ridge had confronted him, his anger boiling over. The foreman had lashed out with his whip, and Ridge had fought back, knocking the man to the ground. Now he was running for his life. He knew if the foreman caught him, he'd be beaten senseless, maybe even killed. He had to escape. He reached the top of the hill and looked down. The town spread out below him, a jumble of buildings and streets. He spotted a narrow alleyway, a maze of shadows and hidden corners. It was his only chance. He plunged into the alleyway, his heart pounding in his chest. He dodged between barrels and crates, his body twisting and turning, his senses on high alert. He knew the foreman was behind him, his heavy footsteps echoing in the narrow space. He reached a dead end. A high brick wall blocked his path. He was trapped, but Ridge didn't panic. He scanned the wall, searching for a handhold, a foothold, anything to help him climb. He found a loose brick and then another. He began to climb, his fingers scraping against the rough surface. The foreman appeared at the entrance to the alleyway, his face contorted with rage. "I'm gonna get you, boy," he roared. Ridge ignored him. He reached the top of the wall and pulled himself over, dropping down into the street on the other side. He was free. That day, Ridge learned a valuable lesson: never give up, always find a way, and never let anyone corner you. Back to the present. Those lessons were about to be put to the test. Deep within the mine shafts, Ridge moved with a newfound confidence. The darkness, the claustrophobia, the sense of being trapped, these were not new to him. He'd faced them before in different forms throughout his life, and he'd always found a way to overcome them. He began to set traps, simple but effective. He loosened support beams, creating the potential for cave-ins. He piled rocks and debris in narrow passages, creating obstacles and distractions. He knew the bounty hunters wouldn't be expecting this. They'd be expecting an easy chase, a quick capture. They were wrong. He found a stash of old dynamite left behind by the miners years ago. It was unstable, dangerous, but if handled carefully, it could be a game changer. He rigged a tripwire to one of the dynamite sticks, placing it in a dark corner of the main shaft, a little surprise for his pursuers. He moved deeper into the labyrinthine tunnels, his senses on high alert. He could hear the faint sounds of the bounty hunters above, their voices echoing through the mine shafts. They were getting closer. He found a small alcove hidden behind a pile of rocks. It was the perfect place for an ambush. He crouched down, his Colt in his hand, waiting. He knew they'd come. They had no choice. He was the only way they were getting paid. He closed his eyes, focusing on his breathing, trying to calm his nerves. He wasn't just fighting for his life. He was fighting for his freedom, for his future. And he wasn't going to let anyone take that away from him. He was Ridge Corbin, and he was the most dangerous man in Coal Bend, not because he was a gunslinger, but because he had nothing left to lose. The sound of approaching footsteps grew louder, closer. Ridge gripped his Colt tighter, his knuckles white. He could hear the voices of the bounty hunters, their words distorted by the echoing tunnels. "He can't have gone far," the scar-faced leader growled. "Spread out, check every tunnel." Ridge held his breath as two of the bounty hunters emerged into the chamber, their lanterns casting flickering shadows on the walls. They moved cautiously, their guns drawn, their eyes scanning the darkness. They didn't see the tripwire. One of the bounty hunters tripped, stumbling forward. The tripwire snapped. A deafening explosion ripped through the chamber. The dynamite detonated, sending a shower of rocks and debris flying through the air. The two bounty hunters were thrown to the ground, stunned and disoriented. Ridge didn't hesitate. He burst from his hiding place, firing his Colt. One of the bounty hunters, still dazed, didn't even have time to react. He slumped to the ground, lifeless. The other bounty hunter scrambled to his feet, his face covered in dust and blood. He raised his gun, aiming at Ridge. Ridge fired again. The bullet struck the bounty hunter in the chest. He gasped, clutching his wound, and collapsed. Ridge quickly reloaded his Colt, his heart pounding in his chest. He had taken down two more bounty hunters, but he knew the others wouldn't be far behind. He had to keep moving to keep fighting. He glanced at the bodies of the fallen bounty hunters. He needed their supplies. He quickly searched their bodies, finding extra ammunition and a canteen of water. Every little bit helped. He heard the sound of approaching footsteps again. The remaining bounty hunters were closing in. He had to go. He turned and ran deeper into the darkness of the mine shafts, leaving the chaos and destruction behind him. The game wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. He ran blindly through the twisting tunnels, his lungs burning, his legs aching. He had no idea where he was going, but he knew he had to keep moving. He could hear the shouts of the bounty hunters behind him, growing closer with each passing moment. He stumbled into a small, dead-end tunnel. He was trapped. He spun around, his Colt raised, ready to face his pursuers. The scar-faced leader and one remaining bounty hunter emerged from the darkness, their faces grim, their guns drawn. They had him cornered. "It's over, Corbin," the leader said, his voice cold and hard. "There's nowhere left to run." Ridge didn't reply. He knew the odds were stacked against him, 2 against 1, but he wasn't going to give up, not without a fight. He took a deep breath, focusing his mind, preparing himself for the inevitable showdown. He had only a few bullets left, but he was determined to make them count. The scar-faced leader raised his gun, aiming at Ridge's chest. "Any last words, Corbin?" Ridge smirked. "Just one," he said. "Goodbye." He fired. His bullet struck the remaining bounty hunter in the arm, causing him to drop his gun. The scar-faced leader hesitated, momentarily distracted. Ridge used that opportunity to dive behind a pile of rocks, using it as cover while he reloaded his Colt. The scar-faced leader fired, his bullet narrowly missing Ridge's head. Ridge returned fire, aiming carefully. His bullet struck the scar-faced leader in the leg. The man cried out in pain, stumbling backwards. Ridge emerged from behind the rocks, his Colt aimed at the leader's head. "It's over," he said. "Drop your gun." The scar-faced leader glared at him, his face contorted with rage. He slowly lowered his gun to the ground. Ridge approached him cautiously, keeping his Colt trained on the leader's head. He kicked the leader's gun away, out of reach. "Now," he said, "tell me who hired you to come after me." The scar-faced leader, writhing in pain, spat on the ground. "I ain't tellin' you nothin', Corbin." Ridge pressed the barrel of his Colt against the man's forehead. "You're in no position to bargain," he said, his voice low and dangerous. The leader hesitated, his eyes filled with fear. It was a man named Thorn," he finally stammered. "He works for the railroad." Thorn, the name sent a chill down Ridge's spine. He knew that name. Thorn was a powerful man, a ruthless man, a man who didn't like loose ends. Ridge holstered his Colt and searched the leader's pockets, finding a crumpled map. It was a map of the mine shafts, old and faded but still legible. As he studied the map, his eyes widened. He saw something he hadn't expected, a hidden exit, a tunnel that led out of the mines and into the hills beyond Coal Bend. Hope surged through him. He wasn't trapped after all. There was a way out. He grabbed the remaining bounty hunter who was still clutching his wounded arm and dragged him to his feet. "You're coming with me," he said. "You're going to show me the way out." The bounty hunter nodded, his face pale with fear. He knew he had no choice. Ridge followed the map, leading the bounty hunter through the twisting tunnels. The air grew colder, the darkness deeper. He could feel the presence of the mountain above him, the promise of freedom. After what seemed like hours, they reached the entrance to the hidden tunnel. It was narrow and low, barely wide enough to crawl through. Ridge hesitated, his instincts warning him that this could be another trap, but he had no choice. He had to take the risk. He pushed the bounty hunter forward. "Go," he said, "show me the way." The bounty hunter crawled into the tunnel, disappearing into the darkness. Ridge followed close behind, his Colt in his hand, his senses on high alert. He was almost there, almost free, but he knew that Thorn wouldn't give up that easily. There were still dangers ahead. The tunnel opened into a small clearing, bathed in the pale light of the setting sun. They were close to the exit, he could feel it. But as Ridge emerged from the tunnel, he froze. Standing before him, blocking his path to freedom, was Thorn himself. He was a tall, imposing figure, dressed in a dark suit, his face as cold and hard as the steel rails he controlled. Beside him stood two more men, their faces hidden in the shadows, their hands resting on their guns. "Corbin," Thorn said, his voice smooth and menacing. "I was hoping we could have a little chat." Ridge pushed the wounded bounty hunter in front of him, using him as a shield. "Get out of my way, Thorn," he said, his voice tight with anger. "This doesn't concern you." Thorn chuckled. "Oh, but it does, Corbin. You see, you know too much. You saw things you shouldn't have seen, and I can't allow you to leave Coal Bend alive." Ridge knew he was trapped. The hidden exit wasn't so hidden after all. Thorn had been waiting for him. He glanced around, assessing his options. There was nowhere to run. He was surrounded. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and outmaneuvered, but he wasn't defeated, not yet. "What do you want, Thorn?" he asked, stalling for time. Thorn smiled. "I want you to disappear, Corbin, permanently. But before you do, I want to know where you hid the evidence." "Evidence?" Ridge frowned. What evidence was Thorn talking about? He had no idea. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. Thorn's smile vanished. "Don't play coy with me, Corbin. I know you have it. The documents, the ledgers, the proof of my indiscretions." Ridge realized what Thorn was after. He knew about the railroad's illegal activities, the bribes, the payoffs, the corruption, and Thorn believed he had proof. I don't have anything, Ridge said, telling the truth. You're wasting your time. Thorn's eyes narrowed. We'll see about that, he said. Kill him. Before Thorn's men could react, Ridge shoved the wounded bounty hunter towards them, sending him stumbling into their path. The sudden movement created a moment of chaos, a brief window of opportunity. Ridge didn't hesitate. He dove to the ground, rolling behind a large boulder. Bullets whizzed past him, kicking up dust and rock fragments. He used the boulder as cover, reloading his Colt as quickly as he could. He knew he couldn't win a straight-up gunfight. He was outnumbered and outgunned. He had to use his wits to turn the environment to his advantage. He noticed a pile of loose rocks near the edge of the clearing, precariously balanced on a ledge. He had an idea. He peeked out from behind the boulder, firing a shot at one of Thorn's men. The man ducked for cover, giving Ridge the opportunity he needed. He scrambled towards the pile of rocks, his heart pounding in his chest. He reached the pile and began to kick at the rocks, sending them tumbling down the ledge. The rocks crashed down on Thorn and his men, creating a landslide of dust and debris. Thorn cursed, scrambling to avoid the falling rocks. His men were caught in the avalanche, struggling to stay on their feet. Ridge used the distraction to his advantage. He emerged from behind the boulder, firing his Colt. One of Thorn's men went down, clutching his chest. The other man was still struggling to escape the falling rocks. Ridge aimed carefully and fired again. The second man fell to the ground, motionless. Thorn was left standing alone, his face contorted with rage, his clothes covered in dust and dirt. He stared at Ridge, his eyes filled with hatred. "You haven't won yet, Corbin," he snarled. "This isn't over." Ridge smirked. "Maybe not," he said, "but you're about to find out why the last man cornered is always the most dangerous." Thorn drew his gun, a gleaming silver revolver, and aimed it at Ridge. His eyes were filled with a cold, calculating rage. This wasn't just about silencing a witness anymore, it was personal. "You've made a powerful enemy today, Corbin," Thorn said, his voice barely a whisper. "An enemy you can't afford to have." Ridge stood his ground, his Colt still in his hand, his finger on the trigger. He knew this was it, the final showdown. He had only a few bullets left, but he was determined to use them wisely. The two men circled each other, their eyes locked in a deadly stare. The tension in the air was thick, palpable. The setting sun cast long shadows across the clearing, creating an eerie and dramatic backdrop for the impending conflict. Thorn fired. The bullet whizzed past Ridge's head, narrowly missing him. He ducked for cover behind the boulder, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew he couldn't stay there. Thorn would just keep firing until he ran out of bullets or found a way to flank him. He had to make a move. He peeked out from behind the boulder, firing a shot at Thorn. The bullet struck a rock near Thorn's feet, sending splinters flying. Thorn didn't flinch. He simply smiled, a cruel, mocking smile. "You're running out of bullets, Corbin," he said. "It's only a matter of time." Ridge knew he was right. He had to do something drastic, something unexpected. He had one bullet left. He took a deep breath, focusing his mind, channeling all his energy into a single, decisive action. He closed his eyes for a moment, visualizing his target, feeling the weight of the Colt in his hand. He burst from behind the boulder, firing his last bullet. The bullet struck Thorn square in the chest. Thorn gasped, clutching his wound, his eyes widening in disbelief. He staggered backwards, his silver revolver falling from his grasp. He collapsed to the ground, his body convulsing. He was dead. Ridge stood there, panting, his Colt still smoking in his hand. He had done it. He had survived. He had proven why the last man cornered is always the most dangerous, because he has nothing left to lose. Ridge stood for a moment, catching his breath, surveying the scene. The clearing was littered with bodies, a testament to the violence that had just unfolded. He had survived, but at a cost. He retrieved his Colt, reholstering the empty weapon. He had no more bullets, no more food, no more water, but he had his freedom. He turned and walked towards the hidden exit, the tunnel that would lead him out of Coal Bend and back into the world. He didn't look back. He knew there was nothing left for him in that town. He crawled through the narrow tunnel, his body aching, his mind exhausted. He emerged on the other side into the cool night air. He was on a hillside overlooking Coal Bend, the town lights twinkling below. He took a deep breath, savoring the taste of freedom. He had escaped. He had outsmarted, outshot, and outlasted his pursuers. He had proven his resilience, his determination to survive against all odds. He began to walk down the hillside, his steps sure and steady. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew he couldn't stay in Coal Bend. He had to leave the past behind him to start a new life. As he walked, he thought about Thorne, about the railroad, about the evidence they were so desperate to retrieve. He realized that he couldn't just walk away. He had to do something to expose their corruption, to bring them to justice. He made a decision. He would find the evidence, the documents, the ledgers that Thorne had been so afraid of. He would expose the railroad's illegal activities to the world. He would become a thorn in their side, a relentless pursuer of justice. He would use his skills, his experience, his determination to make them pay for their crimes. He would prove that even the most powerful enemies could be brought down by a man with nothing left to lose. Ridge Corbin was free, and he was coming for them. News travels fast in the West. Faster than a runaway stagecoach, quicker than a prairie fire. And the news coming out of Coal Bend was sure to solidify Ridge Corbin's reputation as a man to be feared. The story, as it was told and retold in saloons and around campfires, would become a legend. The story of the man who rode into Coal Bend, only to find himself trapped, hunted, and left for dead. The story of the man who faced impossible odds and emerged victorious, leaving a trail of bodies in his wake. They would say that Ridge Corbin had single-handedly taken down 5 bounty hunters, a ruthless railroad boss and his henchmen. They would say that he had turned a dying mining town into a graveyard. They would say that he was a force of nature, a whirlwind of violence, a man who couldn't be stopped, and they would be right. Ridge Corbin had proven that he was not just a wanted man, not just a skilled gunslinger, but something more. He was a survivor. He was a fighter. He was a man who refused to be broken, no matter how dire the circumstances. He had faced death head-on and emerged stronger, more determined, more dangerous than ever before. He had embraced his reputation as the last man cornered, the man who had nothing left to lose. And that was a reputation that would precede him, that would strike fear into the hearts of his enemies, that would make them think twice before crossing his path. Because from that day forward, everyone would know that Ridge Corbin was not a man to be trifled with. He was a man to be respected, a man to be feared, a man to be remembered. The legend of Ridge Corbin had been born in Coal Bend, and it was a legend that would live on long after the dust had settled and the town had faded into oblivion. The legend of the man who proved that the last man cornered is always the most dangerous. Ridge Corbin was gone, but his name would echo through the West forever.